In the midst of long, weary days when your mind is still spinning with news responsibilities and questions that have yet to find their answers, perhaps what you need right now is not more information but a pause, a pocket of silence. A place quiet enough that you no longer have to try to understand, no longer have to react, no longer have to be anyone other than yourself. Tonight, allow yourself to stop, breathe a little more slowly, and gently step into a very soft journey, a space where philosophy does not arrive to challenge you but to comfort you. This video is not designed to awaken you. It is created to help you grow lighter through a question that seems to belong to a distant universe. What if Earth is just one of many failed worlds? If Earth were not the only place that once held life? If out there were worlds that had oceans, skies, and hope, yet could not hold on to them? Then what does our fragile existence truly say? As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Let that question drift slowly through space. You do not need to answer it. Simply listen. And as the mind grows still, sleep will come naturally. When the night has grown deep enough and the last sounds of a long day begin to dissolve into a quiet background, perhaps you are lying somewhere on the very fragile surface of this earth. A familiar room, a familiar bed, a steady rhythm of breathing even if the mind is not yet fully settled. Before thinking about the vast universe, take a very slow moment to notice something simple. You are here, on a planet that never stops turning, drifting through the darkness of space. There is nothing you need to do. Just remain with this sensation for a few more breaths. Modern life often feels as though we have been thrown forward too quickly. One thought follows another. News, plans, worries, expectations. The mind is rarely given permission to pause. But at hours like this, when the light softens and the world demands less, another door quietly opens, a door leading to questions that do not require answers. Questions not meant to solve problems, but simply to allow the mind to loosen within their vastness. And one such question begins far from everyday life, yet touches something at the root of what it means to be human. What if Earth were not the only world that once lived? What if out there in the nearly infinite history of the universe, there were worlds that were once green, once warm, once full of water and atmosphere, once capable of allowing life to emerge? And yet for very quiet, very indifferent reasons, they could not hold on to all of that. Not through dramatic catastrophe, but through slow decline, like a breath growing weaker until it fades. At first, this thought may feel unsettling. It makes Earth seem less special in our imagination. But if we stay with it a little longer, it also carries a different kind of gentleness. When something is not guaranteed, it becomes more precious. When life is not the default state of the universe, but a fragile possibility, the simple fact that you are breathing right now becomes something strange and quietly valuable. Philosophy has long been familiar with standing before such fragility. Marcus Aurelius, in the quiet notes he wrote for himself, once reminded us, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. There is no threat in this sentence and no tragedy. Only an invitation to return to the present moment. An invitation to look directly at the temporary nature of all things, and in doing so, to release unnecessary tension. When we place Earth in the context of worlds that may have failed, something subtle happens in the mind. Personal anxieties begin to feel smaller, not because they do not matter, but because they are no longer standing alone. They become part of a much larger story, a story in which matter, energy, life, and consciousness are all fleeting states within a long, unfolding flow. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Yet in hours like these, there may be no need to awaken in the usual sense. Looking outward toward the universe can also be a gentle way of looking inward. When you imagine yourself lying on a planet floating among billions of stars, the mind naturally loosens its grip on familiar personal narratives. A space opens. And within that space, stillness finds room to spread. The idea of worlds that once had a chance but could not endure acts like a distant mirror. It does not reflect the details of your life, but it reflects a fundamental feeling we all carry, that nothing is permanent. Relationships, roles, versions of ourselves, all are in motion. And this, rather than frightening us, can become a form of permission. Permission not to control everything. permission to be tired, permission to rest. Fyodor Dostoevsky touched this depth when he wrote about human beings standing before meaninglessness and continuing to live. Not because a final answer has been found, but because the act of living itself becomes a temporary answer. In the scale of the universe, our existence does not need an eternal meaning to be complete. It only needs to be fully lived within the moment it is given. So as you lie here now, listening to this story, you do not need to understand the universe. You do not need to worry about the future of Earth or the fate of other worlds. Those questions can remain where they are, like distant stars, present luminous but not demanding. What matters more is this very human feeling that right now, in a rare interval of cosmic time, you are allowed to rest. Let your breathing continue to slow. Let the images of distant worlds soften and fade like city lights seen from far away as the eyelids grow heavy. Earth may be one of very few that still remain, or it may be only a brief moment in the history of the universe, but this moment is real. This sensation is real, and that is enough. You do not need to carry the question into sleep. You do not need to find an answer. Simply allow the mind to rest within that wide space where everything is permitted to arrive and pass away. In that quiet sleep will not be an escape, but a very natural return. There is a very quiet illusion that has accompanied humanity since the earliest days we learned to lift our eyes toward the sky. It is the illusion of being special. Not in a boastful sense, but in a deeply human one. When we have only a single experience, we easily mistake it for uniqueness. We are born, we grow, we love, we worry, and eventually we grow tired, all of it unfolding on the same planet. Earth is the only place that has ever given us the feeling of home. And so quite naturally we begin to believe it must be something rare, unusual, almost chosen. But pause here for a moment, just a moment, and gently notice how this belief is formed. It does not arise from evidence, but from the absence of other experience. We have never stood on a second planet to compare, never breathed a different atmosphere, never watched a sun rise over an unfamiliar surface. All of our intuition about the universe is built from a single point. And from that single point, the mind does what it has always done well, it generalizes. Distance plays a quiet but powerful role in this story. Other worlds are too far away to feel real. They exist as number signals, graphs, faint points of light in telescopes. The human brain was not designed to directly sense things separated by tens, hundreds, or thousands of light years. And so they become abstract. And when something is too abstract, we tend to simplify it. Without intending to, we divide the universe into two neat compartments. On one side, dead rocks, cold, silent, indifferent, a dry Mars, a suffocating Venus, icy moons. On the other side, a fortunate Earth green, warm, alive, as if there were no room left between these two extremes for any other possibility. Yet it is precisely in the space between them that a vast gray zone has been overlooked. That gray zone is the realm of worlds that once held hope. Not paradise and not hell, simply planets whose initial conditions were enough for life to quietly begin. Water for a time, an atmosphere thick enough to hold warmth, energy sufficient to spark complex chemistry. And then through changes that were slow and silent, they slipped away from that fragile balance. There was no clear moment of apocalypse, only a gradual shift until the ability to sustain life quietly disappeared. This idea unsettles the illusion of our own specialness, but it need not cause anxiety. On the contrary, it opens a gentler way of seeing. Earth may not be the only miracle. It may simply be one of the very few cases in which that delicate chain of conditions has not yet broken. And the difference between special and temporarily fortunate is sometimes only a matter of time. Philosophy has long been accustomed to dismantling such illusions. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of the human tendency to place itself at the center of every story. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "There is an innocence in admiration. It is found in one who has not yet realized that he himself is admired." Read against the backdrop of the cosmos, this sounds like a gentle reminder our admiration for Earth may arise from the fact that we have not yet seen what once existed and then quietly vanished. From the illusion of a special planet, it is only a small step to the illusion of our own specialness. If Earth is the center, then our lives upon it seem to carry a heavier weight than they truly do. Personal anxieties are magnified. Failures feel more crushing. But when the frame widens, when we place ourselves in a universe that may have witnessed countless unfinished beginnings, something begins to lighten. Here, the boundary between science and psychology softens, for the way we see the universe reflects the way we see ourselves. Carl Jung once observed in Psychological Types, the least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. Meaning in the end does not reside in whether we are unique, but in how we experience what is happening. The gray zone of worlds that once held hope mirrors the gray zones within our inner lives. Not every failure is a total collapse. Not every unfinished beginning is meaningless. There are periods in life that once had the conditions for growth in a certain direction, but then circumstances shifted, resources diminished, and that path closed. This does not render the entire journey a mistake. It simply reminds us that life, whether on the scale of a planet or a soul, always depends on very fragile balances. When we accept that Earth may be a case that has endured, not because it was favored, but because a chain of chance has not yet been broken, a quiet humility emerges. This humility does not make us smaller. It makes us softer, less demanding, less harsh with ourselves. For if the universe is filled with worlds that once had a chance and still could not endure, then a human being who grows tired, loses direction, or falls out of balance is no longer an anomaly. And from this recognition, the current of thought begins to turn. If life can begin in many places, yet holding on to it is so difficult, then the question is no longer why Earth exists. The question becomes, what allows a life to last? What is required to remain within that fragile balance? This question quite naturally carries us into the next chapter of the journey, where we begin to look directly at the vulnerability of life itself, not only out there among the stars, but within each small breath of our own. As the night continues to drift slowly on and the mind gradually settles, as the illusion of specialness slowly settles, another question emerges, quieter, yet deeper. If Earth is not the only miracle, if out there were once worlds with conditions sufficient for life to begin, then what allows us to remain here while so many others did not? It is at this threshold that our line of thought leaves the initial sense of wonder and enters a more sober realization. Beginning life may not be very difficult, but sustaining it is something else entirely. At its most primitive level, life does not ask for much, only suitable matter, stable energy, and enough time. In laboratories, humans have observed chemical reactions that self-organize simple structures capable of replication. In space, we find organic molecules and gas clouds on comets in the dark regions between stars. The building blocks of life are not rare. They are scattered everywhere, as if the universe were not at all reluctant in supplying raw materials. And so the idea that life may have begun in many places is no longer especially radical. Ancient oceans, thick atmospheres, sources of geothermal energy, or gentle stellar radiation, all of these could produce that initial moment. A very small moment when matter first organizes itself in a way capable of sustaining itself. Yet here, a subtle distinction appears. Beginning is not the same as continuing, and there is no law of the universe that promises that once life appears, it will be protected. Stars change. They gradually brighten with time or grow unstable. A planet once resting within a temperate zone can slowly drift beyond that fragile boundary. An atmosphere, the thin garment that holds warmth and shields against radiation, can leak into space if gravity is too weak or if stellar winds grow too fierce. A magnetic field, an invisible yet essential shield, can weaken as a planet's core cools. And then there are cosmic disasters, impacts, radiation bursts, orbital disruptions that arrive on no schedule at all. None of these are punitive. They carry no intention. They are simply the natural consequences of a universe in constant motion. But for life, they are continual trials. Not a single exam, but countless small tests unfolding over millions, even billions of years. And slipping only once can be enough for a chapter to close. It is here that the notion of a failed planet begins to take shape, not failure in a moral sense. There is no fault, only a planet that no longer meets the conditions required for life to continue. Like a book closed halfway through, not because the story was poor, but because the pages decayed, the ink faded, and time moved too far ahead. Life was once there. It tried. It adapted. But in the end, the environment no longer allowed it. This thought may weigh the mind down. Yet if we allow it to drift slowly, without rushing to resist, another layer of meaning begins to appear. That life is not guaranteed, not prioritized, not safeguarded by any force. It exists only as long as conditions allow. And when those conditions change, it departs very quietly. Existential philosophy has long sensed this fragility at the human level. Albert Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, wrote, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." He speaks neither of victory nor of outcome, but of continuation itself, even in the absence of guarantees. Seen this way, the life of a planet is not so different from the life of a human being. We tend to seek stability, a sense that what we have will remain. But the universe does not operate according to our psychological needs. It does not promise that an atmosphere will last forever. It does not ensure that a star will always be gentle. And so the fact that Earth still sustains life is not an obvious natural state, but a chain of balances that has not yet been broken. Viewed from this perspective, life ceases to be a static noun and becomes a process that requires stability for long enough, but never permanence. And precisely because there is no law that guarantees where there is life, there will always be life. Each moment of existence takes on a very different weight, not heavy, but deep. In psychology, accepting impermanence is often considered the first step toward healing. When we stop demanding that life remain unchanged, we begin to breathe more easily. When we stop seeing every loss as a mistake, we allow ourselves to soften. The idea of failed planets, strangely enough, can bring about the same effect. It allows us to see failure not as an ending, but as a natural part of the flow. There are phases in life that once held the conditions for growth in a certain direction. Then the environment shifts, energy diminishes, sources of support disappear, and that chapter closes. This does not negate the value of what occurred. It simply confirms that not everything is born to last forever. And here the current of thought flows naturally into the next section. If life can begin in many places, yet sustaining it requires such a delicate chain of conditions, then perhaps the question is no longer whether life is rare. The question becomes, what allows a planet or a human being to endure long enough in a universe that is always changing? As you lie here listening, allow that question to pass through without holding on to it, like a cloud drifting across the night sky. You do not need to resolve it. Simply let the mind grow accustomed to the idea that life at every scale is a temporary permission. And within that fragile permission, being able to rest, to breathe slowly, to remain quietly with yourself is already a precious form of balance. From this awareness, we will continue into the next chapter, where more concrete, more intimate examples begin to appear. But for now, let the pace of the narration slow. Let the thought of fragile beginnings dissolve into the background of silence. Sleep does not need answers. It only needs a mind that has stopped resisting impermanence and is ready to gently let go. When the thought that life is not guaranteed has had time to settle within the mind, the natural flow of the night draws us closer again. There is no need to travel far among the stars. It is enough to look around the small garden of our own solar system. Here, right beside Earth, lie very quiet stories like unmarked gravestones. They do not speak in words, but in terrain, minerals, and absence. A miniature cemetery close enough that it cannot be ignored. Let us begin with Mars. From a distance, the red planet appears dry and cold like a rock that long ago ran out of things to say. But when we look more closely, traces begin to emerge. Winding valleys, dried riverbeds, ancient deltas. These are not products of imagination. They are memories. Mars once had water flowing across its surface. Minerals formed in wet environments still lie there like pages of a book not yet completely erased. There was a time far in the past when Mars was warm enough, wrapped in a thick enough atmosphere, supplied with enough energy to allow microbial life, at least in theory. But then very slowly a chain of balances began to break. The planet's core cooled, its magnetic field weakened. The invisible shield was gone. Solar winds began to strip away the atmosphere little by little. And as the atmosphere thinned, water could no longer be held. It evaporated or froze or escaped into space. There was no clear moment of apocalypse, only a long retreat of the conditions that once allowed life. Mars did not die in a dramatic sense. It lost its capacity. And that is what makes its story more haunting. Life was not taken away in an instant. It was taken by time. Then there is Venus, a name that once evoked beauty, yet its surface is a burning inferno. The irony is that Venus is remarkably similar to Earth in size and composition. In the distant past, it may have had oceans. It may have had water clouds, rain, and a relatively stable climate cycle. But somewhere along the timeline, a lethal feedback loop was triggered. Temperatures rose, water evaporated. Water vapor, a powerful greenhouse gas, trapped more heat. Temperatures rose again, and the loop closed. A runaway greenhouse effect does not require a dramatic shock to begin. It needs only to cross a very small threshold. And once crossed, there is no return. Venus became locked into a state in which every attempt at balance failed. A surface hot enough to melt lead, pressure strong enough to crush familiar structures. If Mars is a story of gradual loss, Venus is a story of excess. Too hot, too dense, too much of what once seemed necessary. Two planets, two different paths. Yet the same outcome, no capacity to sustain surface life. And from this, a very quiet message emerges. Being in the right place is not enough. Sitting within the habitable zone guarantees nothing. Having water guarantees nothing. Having a beginning guarantees nothing. Life does not only need a good starting point, it needs prolonged stability. And that stability in a universe that is always in motion is exceedingly rare. Philosophy often speaks of being in the right time, right place. But the solar system seems to whisper something else. The right time and the right place are necessary conditions, not sufficient ones. Epictetus once wrote in the Discourses, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." Placed alongside Mars and Venus, this line reads like a quiet metaphor. Not having more, but having enough, and not crossing a fragile threshold. These stories are not only planetary science, they echo closely within inner life. There are moments in our lives when we are in the right position, the right job, the right relationship, the right circumstances, but position alone is not enough. Without long-term nourishment, without protective boundaries, without the ability to adjust as conditions change, even the most promising beginnings can drift off course. Mars resembles dreams that once had sufficient initial conditions but gradually lost energy due to a lack of protection. Venus resembles efforts that burn too intensely, too hot until they consume themselves. Neither is wrong in a moral sense. They are simply systems that fell below or exceeded a narrow balance. When we look at the solar system as a miniature cemetery, something curious happens. The mind begins to soften. For if even planets can slip out of livability, then the fragility of human life is no longer a personal failure. It becomes part of a larger pattern, one in which existence always carries the risk of loss. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself in Meditations, observe constantly that all things take place by change. He did not write this to instill fear, but to free the mind from the illusion that anything can remain fixed. Mars and Venus, in their own ways, are reminders written in stone and gas that change needs no reason. It needs only time. And in accepting this, a quiet space begins to open. If Earth still sustains life, it is not because it is perfect, but because its chain of balances has not yet been broken for now. This realization does not make us more anxious. It makes us gently awake, less demanding of the universe's fairness, less demanding of ourselves to always remain in perfect orbit. From this miniature cemetery, the current of thought will naturally carry us onward to places that are not complete failures, yet not whole successes either. Worlds that linger at the edge of light and shadow. But before moving on, let Mars and Venus recede into silence. Let the images of red gold and molten white dissolve into the night. You do not need to carry them into sleep as lessons. Simply let this feeling remain that life, whether on the scale of planets or human beings, does not exist because of a single factor. It exists through a delicate balance between enough and not too much. And in recognizing this, the breath naturally slows. The mind resists less. Sleep arrives as a gentle continuation of a universe that is always changing, yet never in a hurry. Ares and Venus slowly recede like landscapes of heat and cold dissolving into the night. The current of thought does not end with obvious failures. It drifts unhurried into another region, dimmer, quieter, and harder to name. There are no surfaces cracked by drought, no skies crushed by heat. Here, life may have found shelter, not in the light, but in the dark. Not on the surface, but beneath it. Europa and Enceladus appear first two icy worlds that seem utterly lifeless at a glance. Their surfaces are thick sheets of ice, cold, rigid, uninviting. Yet beneath that ice, salty oceans may exist dark, deep, and quietly in motion. Heat does not come from the sun, but from tidal forces from the constant stretching of their orbits. The energy is not loud, but steady. There, if life exists, it does not need light. It learns to live with very little. It adapts by retreating inward. These worlds are not complete failures. They never became barren deserts in the absolute sense, but neither did they open into living surfaces where life could spread, evolve, and interact freely with its surroundings. If life exists there, it is pressed to the margins, narrow spaces, limited energy growth, tightly constrained. Life endures but cannot fully appear. Titan is different. Not water ice, but lakes of methane and ethane. Not water-based chemistry, but another system entirely slow, cold, unfamiliar. Titan reveals a strange possibility that life does not have to resemble us. And yet, even here, weak sunlight and low temperatures slow every process to a dreamlike pace. Titan holds potential, but that potential never erupts into a vibrant surface world. It remains quietly present, like a draft of an idea that was never continued. These worlds lead us to a subtle concept, almost worlds. Not places where everything collapsed, and not places where everything flourished. Simply worlds that were nearly successful. Close to crossing a threshold, but never quite there. Nearly sufficient in conditions, but missing a final piece. And so life, if it exists, must choose another strategy: concealment. Philosophy sometimes calls this existence in darkness, not the darkness of despair, but the darkness of adaptation. Soren Kierkegaard once wrote in The Sickness Unto Death, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." For Europa Enceladus or Titan life, if present, does not solve its environment. It experiences it in the only way available, by contracting, simplifying, enduring. At the psychological level, this image resonates closely. There are periods in life when we do not fully collapse. We continue to exist. We move through our days. But the life within is pushed to the edges. Energy is low. Space is narrow. Light is scarce. We are not dead, but neither are we fully alive in the richest sense. The almost worlds of the universe reflect the almost selves within the human mind. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Those icy worlds do not fail because they lack light. They persist by acknowledging darkness and finding ways to live within it. The human psyche is similar. Some phases of healing do not come from becoming brighter, but from accepting an inward quiet and slow inner life. What makes these near successes special is not that they almost achieve something, but that they reveal how many strategies for survival life possesses. Not every strategy leads to expansion. Not every strategy leads to complexity. Some lead only to preserving a very small spark of existence, just enough to avoid complete disappearance. When we view the universe through this lens, the concepts of success and failure begin to soften. Sharp boundaries fade. Absolute labels lose their grip. There are worlds that do not succeed by our standards, yet do not fail in the sense of emptiness. They exist in between quietly, persistently. And it is precisely this in between that carries a deep, gentle beauty. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself in Meditations, "Do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others." Perhaps when applied to the universe, this line can be heard as a different whisper. Do not force every form of life to become what we are familiar with. A world does not need to resemble Earth to have value. A human being does not need to shine brightly to be allowed to exist. The almost worlds remind us that life sometimes does not move forward but stays. It does not spread but holds. Not surface but depth. And within that depth, time flows more slowly. Fewer reactions, fewer expectations. A rhythm that fits the night. As the current of thought continues, the question naturally shifts again. If there are worlds that are not complete failures yet cannot become surface worlds of life, then where is the boundary that allows a world to cross that threshold? What allows life not only to exist, but to remain in the light? From here, the journey will lead us toward the idea of worlds that lost their capacity, not because they lacked a beginning, but because they lost the conditions for continuation. But for now, let Europa, Enceladus, and Titan drift farther away like glimmering blocks of ice in the imagination. Let the image of hidden life soften in the mind. You do not need to extract a lesson. Simply feel something very gentle that even in darkness, life can find a way to remain. And sometimes in your own life, remaining quietly is already a form of healing deep enough. Let the pace of the narration slow. Let thoughts dissolve. Sleep does not require bright light. It needs a safe darkness, a space where the mind is allowed to contract like the almost worlds of the universe and rest very naturally in peace. As the almost worlds slowly dissolve into the fabric of night, as images of life hidden beneath ice and within slow, unfamiliar chemistries recede into the distance, the current of thought carries us into an even quieter landscape. There is no longer a question of whether life can exist. Only a silent reality remains. Most planets do not die, they simply lose their capacity. And it is precisely this subtle distinction that opens the image of a very different kind of cemetery. This cemetery has no ruins, no broken pillars, no collapsing skies. The planets within it continue to rotate, to follow their orbits, to obey gravity, to reflect the light of their parent stars. They are not erased from the cosmic map. Only one thing has departed: the ability to continue a biological story. Like a book that still has its cover, still has its pages, but in which no new lines are ever written. There is a deeply human metaphor for this state. A house with its lights on, but no one inside. The bulbs still glow, the walls still stand, the room still exists. Yet life, the presence that once made the space a home, has withdrawn. No footsteps, no breath, no small movements that once gave meaning to everything. The emptiness is not loud, it is simply quiet. Planets like these are not tragedies in the conventional sense. There is no moment of collapse, no climax. They simply pass a threshold beyond which life is no longer permitted to remain. Atmospheres thin, temperatures slip outside allowable ranges. Magnetic fields weaken, the chain of conditions that once sustained life breaks. And when that happens, the biological story closes without announcement. In philosophy, silence often carries more meaning than sound. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." The cemetery of worlds seems to exist within that realm of silence. There is no direct message, no warning, only the presence of a lost capacity enough to quiet the observer. What makes this image paradoxically healing is that it assigns no blame. These planets did not fail because they did something wrong. They were not punished. They simply followed the natural trajectory of a universe in constant change. And within that neutrality, the human mind is suddenly freed from a familiar burden, the need to justify every ending. At the psychological level, we are deeply accustomed to labeling endings: failure, loss, mistake. But when we look at a planet that still turns, that still exists, even though its biological story has ended, another understanding opens. That there are phases in life that end not because we did something wrong, but because capacity has departed. Energy is no longer there, the environment is no longer supportive, and continuing is no longer living, it is forcing. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time that the human being is being toward death, not as a gesture of pessimism, but as a recognition that all existence is shaped by finitude. The cemetery of worlds performs the same gesture at a cosmic scale. It does not say that life is meaningless. It simply reminds us that capacity, not physical existence, is what disappears most easily. When we accept this, a natural softening occurs. For if a planet can continue to exist after life has ended, then a human being can also continue after an inner chapter has closed. A relationship ends. A dream becomes no longer viable. A version of oneself is no longer appropriate. Not because one failed, but because the conditions that once sustained it have changed. Carl Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And yet sometimes, before choosing to become something else, we must allow an old possibility to rest, without dragging it forward, without reviving it, simply acknowledging that it has completed its role. Seen this way, the cemetery of worlds is not a place of loss, but a place of endings that arrive on time. There is no tragedy, no judgment, only the truth that all living systems require certain conditions to continue, and when those conditions are gone, stopping becomes a natural act. This brings a deep comfort to a tired mind. You do not need to keep every light on. You do not need to remain in every house. There are rooms that once offered shelter and now exist only as memory. Leaving them does not diminish the value of what once unfolded there. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in Meditations, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together." Acceptance here is not surrender. It is a form of reconciliation with the flow. The Cemetery of Worlds invites us to learn that reconciliation not only with the universe, but with ourselves. As we stand before the image of planets that still turn, still exist, even though their biological stories have ended, a very quiet question arises. Not why did they die, but what once allowed them to live. And from that question, a silent appreciation for what still holds capacity in our own lives begins to emerge. But the night does not demand answers. It only asks for a mind that has stopped resisting the idea of endings. A mind willing to see silence not as emptiness, but as a resting space. From the Cemetery of Worlds, the current of thought will continue toward probabilities, toward fragile chains of balance. But for now, let this image remain a little longer. Imagine a house with its lights on in the night, empty inside. Not sad, not frightening, simply still. And within that stillness, your breath naturally slows. The body releases its grip. The mind loosens its hold. Sleep, like a small and gentle ending, arrives softly, not as loss, but as a necessary pause enough that tomorrow, if capacity remains, another story may be written. As the image of the Cemetery of Worlds gradually settles, as we grow accustomed to the idea that many planets do not die but simply lose their capacity, the current of thought naturally leads us to another question, very quiet, yet very deep. If life can begin in many places, if planets continue to exist even after their biological stories have closed, then what has allowed Earth not only to begin, but to endure? When observed slowly enough, the answer is not a single miracle. It resembles a cosmic lottery stretching across billions of years in which life must win not once, but again and again continuously. Long-term life is not determined by any single factor. It is the result of a delicate chain of conditions, each fragile in its own way. The distance from the parent star must be just right. A little closer and water evaporates, triggering thermal feedback loops. A little farther and ice takes over everything. There is no wide safety margin, only a very narrow band where life is permitted to breathe. Planetary size is not a minor detail either. Too small and gravity cannot hold an atmosphere. Too large and pressure and atmospheric composition become hostile. Earth lies within a narrow range that allows it to retain a thin yet essential layer of air. That atmosphere is not only for breathing, it is a thermal blanket, a radiation filter, and the foundational condition for every biological cycle. Lose it, and the biological story ends quickly. Then there is the magnetic field, invisible, difficult to sense, yet acting as a silent gatekeeper. It shields the surface from stellar winds, from streams of energetic particles capable of gradually stripping away an atmosphere. Mars once had water, once had hope, but when its magnetic field weakened, everything began to retreat. Earth, for now, has retained this shield. Not because it is eternal, but because its time to fade has not yet arrived. The moon also plays a role in this chain of fortune, not only by creating tides, but by stabilizing Earth's axial tilt. An axis that wobbles too chaotically would lead to extreme climate variations, making long-term adaptation difficult for life. The presence of a large moon is often overlooked, yet it is crucial in preventing the climate from slipping out of its delicate balance. Farther out, giant planets like Jupiter serve as silent guardians. They attract and deflect many asteroids, reducing the frequency of catastrophic impacts on the inner planets. Not every collision is avoided, but enough are allowing lifetime to recover. And then there is plate tectonics, a slow, deep process often taken for granted. It recycles carbon, regulates long-term climate, and prevents Earth from becoming permanently frozen or irreversibly overheated. Each of these factors alone would already count as a winning ticket, but long-term life requires all of them to be right at the same time and to remain right for an almost unimaginable duration. Not winning once, but winning repeatedly across epochs, across stellar changes, across the planet's own internal evolution. A small deviation at any point could close the story. Existential philosophy has long viewed human life in a similar way. not as a stable achievement, but as an ongoing balance. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "Real generosity toward the future lies in giving all to the present." Placed beside the idea of a cosmic lottery, this line takes on a different tone. There are no guarantees for the future at the planetary scale or the human one. There is only the present, where all temporary conditions happen to coexist. This awareness does not need to lead to anxiety. On the contrary, it can bring a deep sense of gentleness. For if life is the result of countless consecutive lottery wins, then the fact that you are here breathing, listening, does not need to be justified by some grand purpose. It is in itself a rare chain of chance still unfolding, and that is enough. Epictetus reminded us in the Enchiridion, "Do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather wish that what happens happen the way it happens." Applied to the cosmic context, this advice sounds like reconciliation. Not all conditions are within our control. Not every winning streak can be preserved forever. But recognizing the fragility of that chain helps us demand less absolute certainty from life. At the psychological level, many people grow tired believing that happiness is a state to be achieved and then maintained. But Earth did not achieve life once and be done with it. It must sustain it day after day in a universe that constantly tests it. Like human beings, peace is not a destination, but a process of continual adjustment. Some days are favorable, some are unsteady, and simply remaining within balance today is already something precious. When we view life as a cosmic lottery, the idea of fairness begins to dissolve. Not every planet receives the same chances. Not every human being is born into equal conditions. This does not make the universe cruel, it makes it neutral. And within that neutrality, gratitude can arise quiet, unshowy. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Receive without pride, let go without attachment." Recognizing life as a chain of unlikely wins does not lead to arrogance, it leads to humility. And knowing that the chain is not guaranteed teaches us to release more gently, cling less tightly, and live more softly. From here, the current of thought will move toward an even larger question. If life must keep winning the lottery to persist, if the chain of conditions is so fragile, then is the silence of the universe still so puzzling, and might there be invisible filters waiting ahead? But before stepping into that question, allow the mind to rest here for a moment. Imagine each element, distance, atmosphere, magnetic field, moon guardian planets, holding together a very delicate balance. And in this moment, that balance still remains. Your breathing does as well. It does not need to be perfect, only sufficient. As this thought settles, the body naturally releases its tension. Sleep does not require victory. It requires only a chain of conditions that are just enough. And tonight, like Earth, in a rare moment of the universe, you have them. As the thought of the cosmic lottery continues to settle of fragile chains of balance that must keep winning in order for life to endure, a very natural space opens up. It is the space of silence. For if the conditions are not impossibly rare, if the winning tickets are not unthinkable, then why does the night sky remain unanswered? Why among hundreds of billions of stars does the universe seem not to speak to us? Here, an idea appears under a name that sounds cold, the Great Filter. Not as a threat, but as a concept meant to be listened to. The Great Filter is the hypothesis that somewhere along the path from lifeless matter to thinking civilizations, there exists one or several barriers so severe that most attempts never pass through. Not because the universe is hostile, but because the necessary chains of conditions rarely line up for long enough. The possibilities are not mutually exclusive. It may be that life itself is rare, that even though the ingredients are scattered everywhere, the moment of beginning is difficult to achieve. Or it may be that complex life is rare, that the step from microbes to multicellular beings is a leap easily blocked. Or it may be that civilizations tend to destroy themselves, that once intelligence becomes powerful enough to reshape the world, it simultaneously creates risks beyond its ability to manage. But among these possibilities, there is one that causes the mind to quietly sink. The filter may lie ahead of us. That is, we may not have passed the greatest barriers yet. The most severe threshold may still be waiting, not loudly, not with warning. Simply existing as a limit, one that very few civilizations are patient enough, humble enough, or self-restrained enough to cross. Seen this way, the silence of the universe is no longer an empty terror. It becomes an open question. Perhaps there were civilizations out there that once lit up their own skies and then quietly faded. Not because of moral failure, but because the conditions required for long-term survival are so demanding as to seem almost impossible. And so no voice ever reached us. Philosophy has long treated silence as a teacher. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensée, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me." This need not be read as simple fear. It is a deeply human admission that when faced with immensity, the mind trembles. Not to panic, but to listen to itself. If the great filter is real, it does not have to be a single catastrophic event. It may be a sequence of small choices repeated over time, each one requiring subtle adjustment. Life is not erased in an instant, but gradually slips out of continuity when balance is lost. At the planetary scale, this balance involves atmosphere magnetic fields, temperature. At the scale of civilization, it may involve patience, cooperation, and self-imposed limits. Here, the boundary between cosmology and psychology begins to blur. For what may end a civilization is often what exhausts individuals as well speed excess the absence of listening. Carl Jung warned of the shadow side of progress when he wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble." Not as a call to surrender, but as a reminder that not every problem can be solved by more power or more control. The silence of the universe then may not be the absence of others. It may be the result of very few remaining long enough to speak. And if that is so, our presence in this moment on a planet still in balance within a civilization, still learning how to regulate itself, takes on a different tone. Not a privilege, but a very gentle responsibility. The responsibility to let the story continue without needing to make noise. This thought can provoke anxiety if approached too quickly. But if allowed to drift slowly like a night tide, it carries a surprising softness. For if the filter lies ahead, then every moment before reaching it is borrowed time. Not time to fear, but time to live more gently, more slowly, and with clearer awareness of the limits that deserve respect. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Applied to the great filter, this can be heard differently. The limits of existence are not only technological or energetic, but also shaped by how we understand and name those limits. A civilization that can listen to silence may learn more than one that only tries to break it. And here, the current of thought begins to shift almost imperceptibly. If the silence of the universe is not a refusal, but a space waiting to be lived well, then the question is no longer why don't they answer? The question becomes, how will we live while the sky remains quiet? But the night does not demand answers. It only invites a calm presence. Let the great filter remain a distant idea, not something to grip tightly. Let the silence of the universe become the backdrop for your breathing. There is no pressure to decode it, no obligation to be afraid. From here, the journey will move toward risks much closer to home, toward moments when intelligence becomes a double-edged blade when conscious life can threaten itself. But for now, allow the mind to rest within this quiet. Silence is not emptiness. It is a space wide enough for you to set down your questions, for your eyelids to grow heavy, and for sleep to arrive like a very gentle whisper from the universe reminding you that not everything needs to be answered tonight. As the silence of the universe still rests over the mind, as the great filter has not yet appeared as an event but only as a distant threshold, the current of thought quietly turns in a nearer direction, very near. No longer asteroids from afar nor unstable stars. The threat begins to emerge from within intelligent life itself, not loudly, not from the outside, but from small choices repeated again and again made by thinking beings. This makes Earth fragile in a very particular way, not because we are stronger, but because we know. We know about climate change. We know about resource depletion. We know that weapons can exceed the purpose of defense. We know that technology, when accelerated too quickly, can generate risks beyond the control of those who create it. Few planets, if any, reach a stage where life can look directly at its own fragility. But knowing is not the same as acting. And it is precisely in the distance between these two, knowing and doing, that the greatest risks quietly accumulate. Climate change is not an immediate catastrophe. It resembles Mars more than an explosion. Temperatures rise slowly. Climate cycles drift out of balance with great subtlety. And because of this, the human mind, accustomed to reacting to clear danger, tends to overlook it. Resource depletion is similar. There is no single morning when everything disappears, only erosion. Slow, steady, until the capacity to sustain a complex system is no longer there. Weapons and technology carry a different tone. They represent intelligence, the ability of humanity to extend power far beyond biological limits. But precisely for that reason, they also carry a deep paradox. When capability grows faster than wisdom, each step forward can also be a step closer to the edge. No malice is required, only impatience, a lack of coordination, a lack of self-restraint. Here, the danger does not lie in humanity being insufficiently intelligent. It lies in the fact that intelligence does not automatically come with slowness. Intelligence accelerates speed, while long-term life requires rhythm. And when rhythm is broken, the system, whether planetary or psychological, begins to fracture. Philosophy touched this contradiction long ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Placed within the context of a technological civilization, this line sounds like a very humble whisper. Not everything that can be done should be done. Not everything that can be created needs to be pushed to its limit. Intelligent life becomes a threat to itself, not because it is evil, but because it becomes too successful at expanding power before learning how to maintain balance. Like Venus not lacking energy but having too much. Like the almost worlds not lacking existence but lacking space to breathe. At the psychological level, this image feels familiar. There are people who do not collapse because they lack ability, but because they are overloaded. Too many choices, too much stimulation, too much speed. They know they are tired, yet they continue. They know they are fragile, yet they postpone stopping. And that postponement, repeated again and again, forms a dangerous trajectory. What makes Earth different, as noted, is that we know. We have data, models, projections, collective memory of ecosystems that have collapsed before. But knowledge, when not integrated into the rhythm of living, can become another burden. Knowing without acting creates a low-grade tension, not explosive but persistent. Here, the great filter no longer feels external. It begins to resemble an inner test, not of intelligence but of self-regulation, not of technology but of restraint. And this makes the question profoundly human: can a system that knows it is fragile learn to live more gently, more slowly, and long enough? Albert Camus wrote in The Rebel. The welfare of humanity is always the alibi of tyrants. This line is not aimed at science or progress, but at the habit of justifying every action with an abstract future. When the future is used to obscure the present, life is easily sacrificed in small portions until return is no longer possible. But this chapter does not need to end in anxiety, because the very act of recognizing an internal risk is already rare. A planet that does not know it is fragile has no chance to adjust. A civilization that cannot reflect on itself is unlikely to endure. And a human being who does not recognize their limits will soon be exhausted. In-depth psychology, healing does not come from eliminating darkness, but from facing it. Carl Jung emphasized that what is ignored returns in the form of fate. Applied to the planetary scale, this sounds like a quiet reminder: internal risks do not vanish when we look away. But they also do not need to dominate the mind if we allow ourselves to see them slowly without panic. And here the current of thought begins to soften. If intelligent life can become a threat, it can also become a caretaker if it learns how to listen. There is no need to solve everything within a single lifetime, no need to optimize every process, only to keep the rhythm of life from exceeding the system's capacity to endure. From this chapter, the journey will continue toward moments when Earth nearly lost its balance, silent near escapes. But for now, allow the mind to rest here. Not to fear the future, but to feel something very simple: knowing one's fragility is not weakness. It is the beginning of care. Let the breath slow. Let the thought of responsibility dissolve into something lighter, not a burden, but a gentle awareness. Sleep does not require solutions. It requires only a mind that has stopped running faster than it can sustain. And in this moment, as you pause, as you allow yourself to do nothing at all, you are practicing the very thing intelligent life needs most to avoid becoming its own threat: stopping at the right time. As the thought that intelligent life can become a threat to itself slowly settles, the flow of the night brings us back to something very fundamental. Earth has been fragile for a very long time, long before humans ever appeared. Not just once, but many times. Moments when had things shifted even slightly, very slightly, this story would not have continued. And this truth, when seen slowly, does not frighten us. It softens us. Begin far back in time when the sun was much fainter than it is today. The faint young sun paradox tells us that billions of years ago the sun emitted significantly less energy. By simple logic, Earth should have been completely frozen, but it was not. The atmosphere retained enough heat. The greenhouse effect was strong enough, yet did not cross the threshold. Water remained liquid. Early life continued. A minor deviation in atmospheric composition and Earth might have become a silent ice world very early on. Then came the moon forming impact, an event both violent and decisive. A Mars-sized body struck the young Earth, ejecting material that later became the moon. That collision could have destroyed everything. Instead, it produced a satellite large enough to stabilize Earth's axial tilt, regulate climate, and generate tidal rhythms. An accident became a foundation. A moment that nearly ended the story became a condition for its continuation. Throughout the history of life, mass extinctions mark some of the darkest chapters. More than 90% of species vanished. Oceans changed color. The atmosphere altered its composition. Ecosystems that had grown complex collapsed. Yet after each event, life did not disappear entirely. It retreated. It simplified. It waited. And then very slowly it experimented again with new forms. There was no guarantee it would return. But it did. Snowball Earth represents one of the most extreme episodes. The planet was nearly entirely encased in ice. Oceans froze. Light barely penetrated. Life was pushed into small, deep, dark refuges. Had the ice advanced just a little further, cold feedback loops might have locked Earth into permanent glaciation. But volcanoes continued to erupt. Greenhouse gases accumulated. And when the ice finally melted, the world opened again. Once more, life passed through a very narrow gap. There were also supervolcanoes, not the familiar kinds, but eruptions large enough to alter global climate. Ash darkened the skies. Temperatures fell, food chains fractured. And then there were asteroid impacts, collisions from space that arrived without warning. Each time, Earth approached a boundary where the biological story could have ended. What is striking is that none of these events were designed to save life. There was no plan, no intention. Only chains of physical, chemical, and geological reactions. And within those chains, life was repeatedly brought to the edge of erasure. Each time, only a slight shift, a bit more atmosphere, a bit more energy, a stronger impact would have changed everything. Philosophy often speaks of the randomness of existence in very human terms. David Hume once wrote, "Custom is the great guide of human life." We are accustomed to Earth being here, so we take it as normal. But planetary history shows that nothing about this is self-evident. Familiarity with the present conceals the fragile sequence that led to it. Seen this way, Earth is not a solid foundation. It resembles a narrow path winding between countless abysses. And life did not defeat these challenges. It survived them. That distinction matters. Victory implies strength. Survival implies adaptation, yielding and sometimes retreating at the right moment. At the psychological level, this story resonates closely. There are periods in life when you are not stronger than adversity. You simply do not break. You do not collapse completely. You preserve a small core, a breath, a habit, a connection. And that is enough for the story to continue. Not because you were favored, but because you did not drift too far. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live." This line is not a call to haste. It reminds us that everything unfolds within a very fragile window of time. Recognizing this does not make life rushed. It slows it down because we begin to pay closer attention to each step. Earth's narrow escapes are not tales of heroism. They are stories of tiny deviations that happen to be just right. And because of that, they carry a quiet beauty. No spectacle, no climax. Only the fact that the story was not stopped. When we place ourselves within this current, many personal anxieties begin to dissolve. Not because they are unimportant, but because we see ourselves as part of a long history of near loss. This does not erase pain, but it makes pain less lonely. It situates our private fatigue within a context where simply being here was never guaranteed. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, to live is to suffer to survive, is to find some meaning in the suffering. Earth's life seen this way does not search for eternal meaning. It continually finds ways to remain, and within that remaining, a very quiet form of meaning appears. From this chapter, the flow of thought will move toward larger cycles, toward how matter is recycled, toward how failure is not an absolute ending. But for now, let these narrow escapes remain as a gentle feeling. Not to worry that everything might collapse, but to sense that the fact it has not collapsed is rare. Notice your breath. It too is a chain of very small escapes. With each inhale and exhale, a slight deviation would call the body into alarm. But tonight, everything is just right. Like Earth during its most fragile moments in history, you are within a temporary balance. You do not need to hold it tightly. You do not need to guard it. Simply remain within it. Sleep like life on this planet does not need to conquer. It only needs to continue. And in that gentle continuation, the story of Earth and of you is allowed to drift a little further enough that tomorrow, if the balance remains just barely right, everything may go on. As the story of Earth's narrow escape slowly settles, as we grow accustomed to the idea that life can vanish with only the slightest deviation, the flow of the night opens into a wider, slower, and even quieter vision. Failure is not an absolute ending. In the universe, there is no loss in the way we usually understand it. There is only transformation. Only a silent, persistent cycle of recycling that stretches far beyond any biological story. Matter does not disappear. It changes roles. A dead planet does not fall out of the universe like an erased mistake. It continues to rotate. It continues to obey gravity. It continues to take part in collisions, dust clouds, and new formations. Atoms that once belonged to ancient oceans, once formed atmospheres, once served as the ground for life, will separate, recombine, and one day become material for other worlds. Seen this way, the cemetery of worlds is not a place of endings. It is a reservoir, not a reservoir of memory, but of future possibility. No stone is discarded. No element carries the mark of failure. The universe does not remember as humans do. It does not regret. It reuses. Ancient philosophy touched this intuition very early. Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, not because the river disappears, but because the water has changed." The universe's recycling cycle is the same. There is no final state, only a continuous flow of forms, structures, and roles. When life is seen through this lens, something very gentle happens in the mind. Life is no longer the center of the universe, but a temporary phase of matter. Under very narrow, very rare conditions, matter organizes itself into systems that can replicate, adapt, and feel. And when conditions change, that phase closes. There is no tragedy, no judgment, only a transition into another form. This does not make life meaningless. On the contrary, it places life in its true context, fragile, rare, and therefore deeply worth living fully. Like a small flame in the night, not eternal, but warm enough to illuminate a moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "All things are in a process of change, and you yourself are subject to constant change." Placed within the universe's cycle of recycling, this line sounds like a lullaby. There is nothing that must be held on to absolutely. Nothing that needs to be frozen in its current shape. Even endings are serving a larger movement. At the planetary scale, this is clear. Dying stars forge heavy elements. Collapsing dust clouds form new star systems. Disintegrating planets become part of circulating material. There is no loss, only reassignment. The universe does not preserve individual worlds. It preserves the capacity to create worlds. When this idea touches inner life, it carries a quiet kind of healing. There are phases of your life that have ended, not because you were weak, but because conditions changed. The energies that once sustained a version of you are no longer there. And this does not render that chapter meaningless. It simply means that psychological matter, memories, skills, emotions is being prepared for another role. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Yet before becoming, we often must dissolve. Not as collapse, but as a necessary decomposition for restructuring. The universe's recycling cycle reminds us that dissolution is not the opposite of creation. It is the condition for creation. When a planet no longer holds life, it is not expelled from the universe. When a person releases an old identity, they do not vanish either. Both are simply leaving a structure that no longer fits. And in the space that follows, a very important silence appears, a silence for matter to rearrange itself, a silence for energy to find new paths. Blaise Pascal wrote, "Nature is an infinite sphere of which the center is everywhere and the circumference nowhere." In such a universe, there is no fixed center, no absolute endpoint. Everything is transitional. Every form is temporary. And because of this, a world without life is not a final tragedy. It is a note within a very long composition. This allows us to loosen our grip. We do not need to save everything. We do not need to preserve every form. Life as a temporary phase of matter does not need to last forever to have value. It only needs to have been present, to have felt, to have connected. From here, the flow of thought will begin to move toward Earth's very particular position, not as the center of the universe, but as a temporary survivor and at the same time a candidate for future cycles. But before stepping into that, allow this idea of recycling to remain a little longer. Imagine that every anxiety, every failure, every ending in your life does not disappear, but changes form. It settles, breaks down, and becomes the ground for something else, even if you cannot yet see it. You do not need to believe this as a doctrine. Simply allow the thought to exist lightly. Sleep, too, is a small cycle of recycling. Consciousness dissolves. The body reorganizes. What could not be resolved during the day is gently set down. There is no loss, only a change of state. And within that change, you do not need to do anything at all. Let your breathing guide you into silence. Like matter in the universe, you are temporarily leaving one waking form to enter another quieter, darker, deeper. Not an ending, just another temporary phase of the same continuous flow. As the idea of the universe's recycling cycles has had time to settle, as we grow accustomed to the thought that every ending is merely a change of role, the flow of the night brings us very close again. We are no longer looking at planets that have closed their stories, no longer standing before disintegrated worlds, finding comfort in transformation alone. This time our gaze rests on Earth, not as a center, not as an exception, but as a temporary survivor, and at the same time a candidate. We do not yet belong to the cemetery of worlds, but we are not safe either. This in-between is thin. It is not a title nor a guarantee. It is more like a threshold where life is still unfolding, yet every supporting condition remains subject to change. Here, habitability is not a fixed state. It is a temporary balance maintained by fragile chains of conditions and capable of slipping if pulled too far. Seen this way, Earth was not granted life. It is holding life as one holds a long breath. And that breath, though it has lasted billions of years, still needs to be breathed. There is no law that ensures it will continue on its own, no automatic mechanism that preserves this balance forever. If Earth has any true distinction, it does not lie in its position, its size, or in how many times it has won the lottery. Its only difference lies in awareness. For the first time in the universe, we know a living planet has given rise to beings who know that their conditions for living are temporary. We know about extinction histories. We know about climate, magnetic fields, oceans, carbon cycles. We know that the very forces that once saved Earth also nearly pushed it out of balance. And that knowledge places us in a strange position. We are both beneficiaries and caretakers. But awareness alone is not enough. Awareness is only a doorway. Stepping through it or not remains a choice, slow, repeated, and rarely dramatic. Here, the great filter is no longer a distant barrier in some far future. It becomes an everyday test. Can a system that knows it is fragile learn to live more gently, more slowly, and long enough? Stoic philosophy has long spoken of distinguishing what lies within our control from what does not. Epictetus wrote in the Enchiridion, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." Placed in a planetary context, this line carries a gentle meaning. We do not control how long the sun will shine. We do not control the orbits of distant celestial bodies, but we can influence the rhythm of the system we inhabit. And that rhythm at the human scale is shaped by countless small choices. Habitability, then, is not merely a physical property. It becomes a relationship between life and the conditions that allow life to persist. And like all relationships, it requires listening, adjustment, and sometimes restraint. Not every desire can be satisfied without harming the shared balance. At the psychological level, this resonates deeply. There are periods in life when we can still function, yet no longer truly live in a deeper sense. The environment still exists, but it no longer nourishes. And if we continue to accelerate, continue to extract, continue to force, the inner system will soon signal through fatigue, anxiety, or emptiness. Earth, in its own way, is sending similar signals not in words, but through the gradual drifting of its cycles. Martin Heidegger wrote of human beings as being in the world, not standing outside as observers, but existing within. Applied to Earth, this reminds us that we are not managers operating from beyond the system. We are part of it. Every action returns not as punishment, but as natural feedback. For this reason, awareness becomes the final opportunity, not in a tragic sense, but in a very practical one. No technology can fully replace collective self-regulation. No plan can succeed if the rhythm of life continues to exceed the system's capacity to endure. Awareness without a change in rhythm gradually turns into noise. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "In meditations, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Placed in a planetary context, this is no longer moral instruction. It becomes a quiet invitation. Do not only speak of a sustainable world, live at a sustainable rhythm in small choices and patterns of consumption and slowing down when needed. Yet this chapter does not call for immediate action. It does not come to make you more alert. It comes to make you lighter. For if Earth is in between, not yet part of the cemetery, but not secure either, then every calm moment of the present is not guaranteed. And when this is seen, appreciation arises naturally, not loudly, not anxiously, just a deeply human feeling, I am here. At the personal level, awareness is also a final opportunity in a very intimate way. Awareness that you do not need to live faster than your capacity allows, that you do not need to exhaust all your energy just to prove existence. Like this planet, you are holding a temporary balance, and caring for that balance is not selfish. It is the condition for the story to continue. From here, the journey gently tilts toward its ending, where questions are set down, where silence is allowed to remain. But before moving on, notice this feeling: you are lying on a planet that is not ended. A planet still experimenting with how to remain with life. And within that experiment, slowness, listening, and softness are not weaknesses. They are survival strategies. Let your breathing slow. Let thoughts of responsibility dissolve into presence. You do not need to carry Earth on your shoulders. You only need to be in this moment where habitability still holds, where the story continues, where you need do nothing to deserve life. Sleep like Earth in this fragile position is not a victory. It is a gentle continuation. And as you allow yourself to drift into it, you are practicing what life at every scale needs most: to remain knowing when to pause, knowing how to listen, and knowing how to rest while the chance still exists. As the final chapter closes, as the idea of Earth as a temporary survivor still lingers softly in the mind, the flow of the night does not end with a period. It slowly dissolves, not to answer anything further, but to let go. To let go of questions, to let go of the need to understand, to let go even of the desire for a conclusion solid enough to carry into tomorrow. The universe in the end makes no promise of life. It signs no contract. It offers no guarantee that what exists will continue to exist. The universe only opens opportunities, rare, fragile, in which matter may arrange itself in a way that allows life to appear. And that same universe, through its neutral motions, may withdraw that opportunity at any time without explanation. Earth has held on to that opportunity for a very long time, longer than most things we can imagine. Through eras of a faint young sun, through global ice, through extinctions, impacts, volcanoes, and even the risks created by intelligent life itself. Not because Earth was favored, but because the fragile chain of balance has not yet broken. But nothing in all of this guarantees the future. And here, at this point, the only question that remains very quiet, very cold, and very honest appears: how much longer can we hold on? This is not a question that needs to be answered now, nor is it a question to be carried as a burden. It is like a dim point of light at the edge of awareness, enough to remind us that the present is not inevitable, not enough to force action or anxiety in this moment. When philosophy reaches its farthest edge, it rarely provides solutions. It brings us back to silence. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." Some things, when seen deeply enough, require no more words. Not because they are meaningless, but because any words would be excessive. Life in the universe may be extremely rare, or it may have flourished and faded many times in many places. We do not know. And perhaps in some quiet way, not knowing is exactly what suits the human position. Not as a lack, but as space to breathe. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself in Meditations, "Do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others. Read in the stillness of night." This can sound like a gentle instruction. Do not spend what remains of your attention on what lies beyond your reach. Not because it is unimportant, but because you are here in a moment that is very specific, very small, and very real. When asking how much longer can we hold on, there is no need to imagine the end of the universe. It is enough to return to this close sensation, the breath moving in and out, the weight of the body being held, the quiet spreading as the words grow fewer. Life in this moment is not a project that needs protecting. It is simply a state that is happening. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. But perhaps right now there is no need to climb another mountain, no need to continue the struggle. There are hours in the night when setting things down is itself a complete act. The universe does not require you to understand it in order to be within it. It does not demand constant alertness. It does not test you. It does not wait for the correct answer. It simply continues to move. And within that movement, there are rare moments when consciousness is allowed to rest without feeling deficient. Earth has held its opportunity for a very long time. How much longer, no one knows. But that question does not need to follow you into sleep. Sleep is not abandonment. It is a change of state where consciousness withdraws, allowing deeper layers of existence to continue their work in their own way. Carl Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct." And sleep, in a very ancient sense, is a serious form of play within life, where body and mind reorganize themselves without command, without plan. So there is no need for a conclusion, no need for answers, no need to close this journey with a clear message. Simply let it dissolve. Like starlight fading as the eyes close. Like a question placed gently on a table, not to forget it, but so it no longer needs to be held. If the universe only offers opportunities, then this moment is one of them. Not for doing something great, but for resting. For allowing life in the very simple form of a human being asleep to continue a little longer very quietly. Let the words stop here. No final statement, no conclusion. Only silence placed down softly. And within that silence, sleep arrives like a whisper the universe does not need to speak.